Welcome to my channel. In today's tutorial, we'll be making this cute simple dress. If it's something you're interested in, then let's get started. I've gone ahead to mark my horizontal measurement. From my shoulder to my chest line is 10 inches. From my chest line to my waist is 6 inches. I'm going to mark half of my shoulder measurement. From the mark point, I'm going to go down by 1 inch, then I'm going to mark it. Also, my shoulder line, I'm going to mark my neck measurement, which is 3 inches. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to connect them. To get my armhole measurement, I divided my bust by 6, then I added 1.5. I will also mark half of my shoulder measurement on that point, then draw a straight line from my shoulder to my armhole measurement. I'll be extending the line a little bit. I will be making a side dart for this dress. So because my chest line is very close to my armhole opening, I'm going to go down by 1 inch from my chest line. After I was done making this dress, I realized I don't really have to go down by the 1 inch. So you can just skip that 1 inch and just take your measurement from the chest line. From my center front, I'm going to measure half of my nipple to nipple measurement, which I will be marking on my chest point and my waist. Then I'm going to connect them together. The next thing I did was measure quarter of my bust measurement, then I marked it. I will also mark quarter of my bust measurements on that 11-inch line. From the 11-inch line, I went down by 1 inch. From my bust measurements, I'm going to measure 4.5 inches towards that my nipple to nipple measurements. After that, I'll be connecting my darts. From that point, I also went down by 1 inch. So basically, that intake is 2 inches. Since I've taken out 2 inches from the side, and this will affect my waistline. For my waistline, I'll go down by 2 inches. So these 2 inches will serve as my new waistline. On my waistline, I'm going to measure quarter of my waist measurement, then I will add half an inch sewing allowance. Once I'm done with that, I'll be connecting my lines. I've gone ahead to measure the length of my gown. Don't forget to add the 2 inches that intake you took by the side. Don't forget to add it to your hemline. So I'll also add 2 inches to that hemline. For this gown, the front part is a A shape. So what I'm going to do is, for my waistline, the measurement of my waistline, I will add 5 inches to it. Then I'll mark that on my hemline. Then I'll connect it from my waistline to my hemline. I'll get half of my armhole length, then I'm going to mark it from the midpoint. I'll go in by half of an inch. I'll also mark it, then I'll connect my lines. For my neckline, I want a V shape, so from my shoulder I'll go in by 8.5, then I'll mark it, then I'll use my curve rule to connect it to my shoulder. I also added half an inch sewing allowance to the shoulder. Once I'm done with all of this, I'm going to cut out my fabric. For my back, my half length will be 15 inches. Then I also added half an inch sewing allowance to it. From my center back, I'm going to measure 1 inch. This will serve as my zip allowance. I'm going to mark half of my shoulder measurement. Just like I did for the front, I'll go down by 1 inch. Then I'll also mark my neck measurement, which is 3 inches. After that, I'll be connecting it to my shoulder slope. To get my armhole, I divided my bust by 6, then I added 1.5. On that point, I'll also mark quarter of my shoulder measurement. After that, I'm going to connect my lines. After that, I'm going to measure quarter of my bust measurement. Please note that all your measurement take place from that 1 inch zip allowance. I'm going to draw a curve from my shoulder to my bust. From the half length line, I'm going to measure quarter of my waist measurement plus 1 inch that's intake and also half of an inch sewing allowance. I'll be connecting my bust to my waist. For my back neckline, I went down by 9 inches. When I was done making this dress, I realized it was so much. Then I'm going to connect it to my shoulder. I also added half an inch sewing allowance to my shoulder before cutting out my fabric. For the lower part of my back, I'm going to cut a half circle for it. So I'm going to fold in bias form like so. I'll go back to the back upper part of my dress. I'll measure the length of the waistline. Then I'll take out 1 inch that intake from the waistline. So if your waistline is 10 inches, you have to take out 1 inch. So that makes it 9. On the folded circle, I'm just going to measure any part until I get my 9 inches. Then I'll mark it. I will move to the edge of the fabric. Then I'll measure the length from the edge to the marked point. Then I'll mark it all through to get a circle shape. This will be my waistline. I'm going to cross check if it's still the 9 inches. If not, I'm just going to redo it all over again. To get the length of my half circle, I'm going to take out the 15 inches of our upper parts from my actual gown length. So if, let's say my gown length is 40, I'm going to take out 15 inches from 40. So from that waistline, I'm going to measure the remaining measurements. I'm going to measure the length of it. I've gone ahead to cut it out, so this is how it looks like. I'll also divide it into 2 halves, so I will have 2 pieces. To cut my sleeve, the first thing I did was to fold it into 4 so that I'll cut both at once. I will be making a puff sleeve, so I marked 10 inches as my bicep measurement. I'll be using the entire length of my fabric. I will go down by 3 inches to cut out my sleeve curve. I will go ahead and cut out my sleeve once I'm done with that. To cut out facing from my front, I'm just going to place my front piece on the fabric like that. Then I'm going to cut it out. This is how it looks like once I was done cutting. With the same process, I'll also cut out my back facing. I'll be adding pockets to this dress, so I went ahead to cut out 4 pieces. Let's move to the sewing part. The first thing I'm going to do is to sew my side dart. I'll be using pin on those 3 points. Then I'll turn it over to mark it on the other side. Then I'm going to use a ruler to connect the dots. I'll be marking my back dart next. I'm going to measure half of my nipple to nipple measurement, then I'll add half of an inch. I'll make the length of my dart 5 inches. This is what it looks like once I was done sewing the side darts. I'll go ahead to trim the side dart a little bit towards the waist. Once I'm done with that, I'll interlock the sides of all my fabric. The next thing I'm going to do is to sew my facing. I'll make sure right sides are facing each other before I go to the sewing machine to sew. I'll also go ahead to sew my back facing. Once I'm done sewing, I'll make sure to notch the neckline. After that, I'll go ahead and top stitch my facing. I'll also do the same thing to my back neckline. This is how it looks like once I was done top stitching. After that, I'll go ahead and join my back upper part and lower part together. Then I went ahead to sew my pockets on both my front and back piece. Once I'm done sewing my pockets, I'll be sewing my shoulder, my front and back shoulder together. After that, the next thing I'm going to do is to sew my side seam by half of an inch. If you're interested in knowing how to sew a pocket, I have a tutorial on that. For my back piece, I'll be attaching my zip. I'll be sewing my sleeve next. By the hem, what I'm going to do is that I'll create an opening. I'm going to create an opening where I'll pass my elastic. I'm going to cut out my elastic and it measures 9 inches. I'll be cutting 2. Then I'm going to use my safety pin and pass it through the opening. After that, I'm going to stitch them on both sides. Then I'll also stitch the side of my sleeve. I'll be fixing my sleeve on my dress. My dress will be on the wrong side while the sleeve will be on the right side. So I'm going to insert my sleeve inside my dress just like you can see in the video. Once I'm done pinning my sleeve to my dress, I'll go ahead to my sewing machine and sew. This is how it looks like after I'm done sewing. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Bye.